Salvete. Today, I want to look at question 10 for the OCR GCSE exam. In question 10, you will have a choice of doing composition from English into Latin or doing the grammar questions. Now, I always recommend doing both because you will get the marks for the one where you do best. But in this exercise, we're going to look at the grammar and how to avoid missing marks here and there. Before I get started, full disclaimer, this is in no way endorsed by OCR. This is just me as a teacher giving you my personal view of what works and what doesn't. Let's first of all read the text. This is an easy text. I have chosen it because I want you to focus on answering techniques rather than the grammar at this point. If you want to learn more about the grammar, you can look at my resources underneath. Let's read it. First of all, very important, Latin needs to enter through your ears. Perseus erat heros Graecus. Perseus in insula cum matre habitava. Olim Perseus iter longum faciebat, quod monstrum direum necare debebat. Cum Perseus Andromedam in periculo conspexisset, puellae pulcrae statim auxilium dedit. Deinde ad patriam revenit, ut matrem servaret. Tandem Perseus caput Medusae regi saevo ostendit. Caput igitur a rege, qui stultus erat, visum est. Rex statim a Medusa necatus est. I am now going to translate this. You might want to stop the video to see if you can do it on your own. Obviously, you will not get that in the exam, but it's just to give you a little bit more help finding out what everything is. Perseus was a Greek hero. Perseus was living on an island with his mother. Once, Perseus was making a long journey because he had to kill a dreadful monster. Since Perseus had caught sight of Andromeda in danger, he gave help immediately to the beautiful girl. Then he returned to his fatherland in order to save his mother. Finally, Perseus showed the head of Medusa to the cruel king. And so, the head was seen by the king, who was stupid. The king was immediately killed by Medusa. Let's go over the different types of questions that you may be asked. I have given you here 7 examples of questions that you may be asked, and we'll go through them. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 examples for each. Let's start with number 1. In number 1, we have state the case. They will ask you to state the case of a noun and explain why it is being used. Let's see an example. That's the best way to explain this. They might ask you, what case is the word insula in line 1? Here, you need to answer that it's the ablative. And don't give any more information. Don't start explaining it's plural, it's singular, because you may add a harmful addition. Just say it's the ablative. They've asked you for the case, it's the ablative. That's it. Then you need to say why. The best way is to look at the surrounding words and the meaning, and you will see that it is because it follows the preposition in, which, for place where, takes ablative. You don't need to add the last bit. You can just say the preposition in takes the ablative. Let's see another example. Iter. they would be particularly cruel if they were asking you for iter, because lots of people get that confused with iterum, meaning again. So let's go for iter. Let's imagine you're not confused. You don't think it's an adverb, meaning again. You've noticed it means the journey. And they ask you what the case is. It's not one of the most evident ones. It's not like an accusative in or in am from the first and second declension. But if you ask the verb, what was he making? A long journey. So the journey is what he was making. It's the accusative. So you would say here, it's the accusative. You don't need to say anymore. It's the accusative. Why? You could say because it's the direct object of the verb to make. He was making a journey. But notice that they will also accept a good translation, like because it's what he was making. That's not my preference, but it's generally acceptable. Let's take a look at the second type of question. Identify an example of a case in a particular line. This is quite straightforward, like find a nominative in line 1 or find an accusative in line 5, etc. You need to choose, it says an example, so you choose one word. Let's do one per line. For line 1, they could say, choose an example of the nominative. You could say Perseus, that would be the easiest one. But you could also say heros or graecus. There's often more than one possible answer. Let's look at line 2 and let's look for another example. They may ask you, can you give an example of a noun in the accusative case? In this case, make sure you don't give them an adjective if they have a noun. If they've said word, then you can give either. For a noun, we would go for monstrum or iter. Yeah? Now, let's look at line number 3, and let's use it with state the tense of a verb. So, for example, they might ask you, what tense is debebat? You don't need to overcomplicate this. I know that you probably know, oh, this is the third person singular imperfect indicative of the verb debeo. You don't need to say all that. They've asked you for the tense, so say the imperfect. You want to be very careful here. Do not, I repeat, do not use the word past. Past is too general. It's not a tense. You need to say whether it's perfect, imperfect, present, pluperfect, future. Let's look at other examples of questions they might ask you with that same one, because it tends to be one where people make errors that are not necessary. Dedit. Imagine a student gets asked, state the tense of dedit in line 4. If the student says past, he gave, it's the past, it happened in the past. Is that correct? No, it is not correct. You need to say that it's the perfect tense. You don't need to add whether it's first person, third person, indicative, subjunctive, all that. You don't need to say, just say the tense, it's the perfect tense. Excellent. Another example, and obviously more questions are possible. These are just examples. Identify an example of a tense in a particular line. Now, this one is a bit more difficult because you need to choose. Let's move on through the lines. For example, if we go to line 5, they might ask you to find a verb in the perfect. There's only one in this line that fits. But as it happened with the nouns, there might be more than one. In this case, it's ostended, he showed. You don't need to translate it, by the way. You would just say ostended. Another example, to make it a little bit more difficult, they might ask you for a verb in the imperfect in line 6. Here, the only possible option is erat. Don't think that because they say imperfect, you need to go and look for the ba. Yes, 90% of the time it will be a ba, but it could be the verb to be, like this one here. So bear that in mind, yeah? Identify the form of a particular verb and explain why it is used here. And this is probably the most difficult one. They might ask you, and I'm not going to say it's always the subjunctive, but they might ask you for the subjunctive or the infinitive. I've put here, for example, the infinitive. Could be the subjunctive as well. Either, yeah? Could be others, but those are the most common. So, for example, they might ask you, necare. Identify the form of necare and explain why it is used here. You must say this is an infinitive. You don't need to say the tense. Don't tell me if it's present, perfect. Obviously it's present, but you don't need to say. Just say it's an infinitive. And then explain why. There are lots of correct answers here, but they all need to include either a correct translation, because it is what he had to do, or because he had to kill the terrible monster, or what I prefer, which is to talk about the grammar. The best answer for me would be because it follows the modal verb debeo, or you could say debebat. They will not generally accept because it follows another verb, because it's too loose. You need to mention that this is a modal verb. Another example might be identify the form of servaret and explain why it is used here. All you have to say here is that it is subjunctive. I would say imperfect as well. So it's the imperfect subjunctive. You don't need to give any more information. What they're looking for is the subjunctive probably. And then why it is used here. It is not enough to say it follows ut, because ut can be used in other ways and they don't include the subjunctive. So ut is not enough. You should say either it's a purpose clause, or maybe you could go the translation route and say, because he did it in order to save his mother. Pick out a pronoun. And here, actually, I should have given you the most evident ones like is, ipse, hic, hoc, but qui is also a pronoun, yeah? Who was stupid? Who? It's a relative pronoun, so you could say qui, it's a pronoun. Then explain why a verb is in the subjunctive mood. So they might tell you straight away, this is the subjunctive, tell us why. And an example could be, for example, with conspexisse. And then you need to explain that it is because it's in a cum clause. Or you could go the translation route, because it is since he had caught sight of Andromeda. Let's do a couple of bonus one, going line by line. So, line 1, how about if they ask you to find a preposition in this line? What would you say? In or cum? Fantastic. Line number 2, how about they ask you to find an adjective in this line? You could say either longum or dirum. Line number 3. What if they ask you for the tense of conspexisset? You would say it's the pluperfect. It is the pluperfect subjunctive, but they're not asking you for that. They're asking you for the tense, unless they say tense and mood. Line number 4. State the tense of revenit. Now, that one is a really tricky one, because your exam will not have long and short vowels written in them. So it will be the context mostly that's going to tell you which one it is. I have also read it as revenit. It's a long E. That means it's the perfect one. Yeah. Another example. Let's go to line 5. What case is regi and why? You can say it's the dative because it is an indirect object. That's, in my opinion, the best answer. You could also say it is a dative because he gave it to the king, or because it was for the king. Both are correct answers. You may be asked, why is saevo dative? You then might say that it's an adjective agreeing with Reggie and they're both the indirect object. What else might you be asked? Let's go for line 6. They might ask you, can you find a verb in the passive? And the verb in the passive is visum est, was seen, and necatus est, was killed. There are endless combinations of questions that you may be asked. I haven't covered all of them, but I've covered some of the most common ones. And I've also covered some of the main errors that people make. Important ones to remember: forget about the word past. You must state what past tense is it. Yeah? Error number 2, sometimes when they ask you, give a word in line 1 in the ablative, you don't copy it correctly. Make sure that you check the spelling and you copy things correctly. Error number 3, don't add information that they're not asking you for, because if it's wrong, you will lose a mark there as a harmful addition. I hope this helps. For more information, you can check out the resources underneath. Any questions? I'm here to answer. Walete.